Hello, high school staff. I just want to share with you a process that we have been looking at over the last several weeks and wanted to clarify with you how you might go about participating in designing a personal curriculum with a student with an IEP. You'll see here a flowchart. It is also linked in the email that I just sent that this link was included in. And you'll notice there are some steps here to follow. Up at the top of this flowchart is a context and purpose. You can look at that if you want to know a little bit more about personal curriculums. There's also an MDE guidance document, a guidance for parents and educators, as well as a Q&A about PCs for students with an IEP. Quick thing about personal curriculums, they are available for both students with an IEP as well as those without, and the intention is to give them some flexibility, give students flexibility around their requirements as it pertains to the Michigan Merit Curriculum in order to best take courses that align with their educational development plan. So what we would want to do is think about what a student plans to do for their career and how their coursework can best support that plan. So you'll notice here a personal curriculum can be requested by a parent, legal guardian, school employee, student, and that in general we'd want to have a personal curriculum in place early enough, usually around 30 days, to effectively implement the identified standards. Now, what I mean by that is there are really kind of two paths for the personal curriculum. There's a substitution, in which a student might request to take one course instead of a required course. And then there's a modification. Most of today I'll be talking about a modification. A modification is where you take a course and you look at the content standards and you look at the child's EDP and determine which of those standards might we be able to omit or reduce down in order for the student to still take the course but meet the needs of their education development plan. So when we talk about this personal curriculum process, it really requires a partnership and an understanding that the decision being made around what the course will look like and if a personal curriculum is a good option is a collaborative process that's based on the data that's gathered around a student. So once the PC is requested, we need to ensure the student has, if they have an IEP, we then make sure they have an EDP. We use Zello for that. And then once we know that we have those things in place, then the process can be initiated over email. The Q&A indicates that an email can count as a meeting, but you can also have a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting. The documentation indicates that the meeting should have the student there, a parent or guardian, a counselor, or someone qualified to act in that role, mostly because of that career component, the teacher of the content, and a school psychologist. In our case, we also would have a case manager. Relevant student information would be gathered for each course, and the members would provide input on this form. What form, you may ask? This form. All right, it's all digitized. You know, we're moving into the digital world with our forms. In this case, we would want to collect data as the first part of the personal curriculum process. So we would, whoever initiates the personal curriculum request would fill out the top part indicating if it's a substitution or modification, and then they'd record any other information that's pertinent. They then would share this in an email with the case manager. If it's not already the person who filled it out, they'd fill out this part too if it's them. Counselor, classroom teacher, and school psychologist. There's also information on this form specific to the process. This right here links right back to the flow chart that I was just showing you. Has a little bit more information about that idea of the substitution or modification. And then it talks about that for a modified course, the student will be responsible for proficiency on indicated standards. So we really need to know early in the course if we're doing a personal curriculum, because it would require that the teacher then consider which standards in each unit are critical for the student to achieve proficiency on, and then they would kind of adapt throughout the whole course based on the standards. Many courses have worked with our instructional coaches to identify the bare minimum standards that have to be covered in a course. If you don't feel like you've done that yet, please reach out and we will get those linked in this folder here. But that floor is kind of the bare minimum. That doesn't mean every student's going to be at the floor level of standards, but it'll be there. Once this is filled out, the person initiating the form then would review to ensure that it's compliant with the state, that the data at least indicates that we can continue to talk it through. Then the team, as listed up here, has a follow-up conversation. That also can be via email. I imagine that might be difficult in some cases, easier in others, where they review the data in the form and they determine if the request will be agreed upon or denied. It also indicates right here that should happen within 2 weeks of the initial request. The final completed PC form should include the standards if it's a modification, as well as the EDP information. There's a page that's sampled in here for what exact EDP information we're looking at. So when all is said and done, the team gets together, they look at page 1 and a little bit here of this form. Then they would come down here and determine if it's a substitution or what the modification would be, take notes as far as what they discuss, include the EDP profile and standards, and then that package there, all those documents would be, if everyone signs, I guess that's the next point, everyone would need to sign and come to consensus. Once everybody's done that, it goes to the principal. Principal's kind of the final reviewer, and then we of course need the parent and guardian to sign. And once all of that is done, it ends up being communicated out to everybody. So in general, that's the process. I know it was pretty quick, but as you go through it a few times, I think the form kind of walks you through it as well. Our hope is that this clarifies kind of the steps as far as the initial request, the data review, and the final decision, all kind of hinging on the EDP and the goals of the student, and then those identified standards. Please let me know if you have any questions. Try to go as quick as I could there. And also keep in mind while we're implementing this now, that everything's kind of in draft form in that we've never used this process this way before. I'd like to consider it kind of a pilot this spring. So while we are implementing now, we are absolutely open to feedback and can revisit later in the spring to see if we need to make any changes for fall. So thanks for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.